Welcome to this new session as part of our webinar series. This session is Lessons Learned from Marketing 100+ VR Games. I am Thomas Gratz, so I'm a senior manager at Viveport. Been at HTC now for, I guess, a little more than 3.5 years, almost coming up on 4 at this point. So joined right before we launched Viveport globally. So in that time, I've worked with a ton of different developers and essentially marketed here, I say essentially 100+, but it's really been hundreds at this point of how many titles we've launched on the store, which we're over 2,000 now, and we're pretty proud of that. So this session again is part of a bigger series. If you want to see what you've missed, I think this is number 4 in that series. Please head to our YouTube channel. That is essentially the HTC Vive YouTube channel. You'll find them there. And this talk as well will be posted essentially in the next day. All right. And then finally, the goal for this talk is, my hope is that you'll be able to come away with some practical and actionable advice to really improve your marketing as you approach your VR title. Your title could be, we're looking at both pre-release and post-release. So even if you've already launched or are thinking about coming to launch, there should be something here for you. Okay, so agenda. I've kind of bucketed the different topics that we're going to talk about in those 2 areas. So under pre-release, I'm really hoping to cover kind of the audience of VR and getting you thinking about what your end user is going to look like. We're going to look at that through kind of the Viveport lens. We're going to look at monetization and essentially what different business models you have and how you should price your title. And then finally, a quick look at channels that you should consider as you're heading into your release. And then finally, in the second section, we'll essentially cover things post-release. So how to engage with your community, different promotions you can run, and finally metrics you should be looking for. And then after the talk, we'll have a Q&A session. Everybody should have on the right side of their screen essentially a chat window or essentially a question button. Feel free as the talk goes on to ask questions there, and we'll kind of come back around to them at the end of the session. So looking forward to answering what you have to ask. One thing too before I get started is just a few assumptions we're making. This is mostly around PC VR. A lot of the analytics and things I've pulled have kind of looked on the PC VR side of the Viveport business. We do support standalone headsets, but that will essentially, the numbers here are going to be really oriented PC VR. We're also really focused on B2B, or B2C, the exact opposite. So really reaching end users in their home. We're not looking at if you're trying to sell into enterprise or other businesses. That's kind of a different marketing strategy. So just wanted to put ahead. Okay. And as we get into this, I would want, I think you'll get the most benefit if you're thinking about what you're actually trying to achieve with marketing. I think a lot of developers, just think I need marketing because I need marketing. Everybody knows that. But what you're actually trying to generate, with that marketing initiative, it's not just for the sake of itself. Usually these are the 4 big ones that I find. Developers are looking for new players, trying to increase revenue through sales and purchases, increasing engagement with the audience that they have, or this one I think people don't remember as much, but really build their brand and IP around their studio or title. So, they're thinking more of a franchise level. How can they turn their titles into an ongoing, essentially revenue source down the line? So instead of just that one specific title, they're really thinking, for the next title and for the pedigree of the studio. So keep in mind what your goals are when you're approaching any kind of marketing campaign. It'll really help you inform your strategy and what direction you should take. All right, so jumping into our first section for pre-release. So audience. Developers often don't ask themselves when they're, they just get excited about a certain game mechanic, an idea, idea, and they just jump into it. And that may or may not have legs, right? So pretty early on in the project, especially when you're starting to think about marketing, but even when you're building, you have to think, who am I actually creating this for? Where are they located in the world? What languages do they speak? And how do they even go about playing? So I'm hoping to answer a few of these based on kind of what we see in the Viveport usage numbers. So you can keep these in mind as you approach your VR titles. So the geography of Viveport users, the majority of our customers are based in North America. US, the United States takes up about 50% of the Viveport user base. Europe is second with a number of territories, the United Kingdom, Germany, and France being the largest, but there's a lot of different countries there that end up making Europe the second major region. And then finally, APAC. China is actually, by numbers, is our second largest territory after the United States. So really, when it comes down to languages, about 80% of our users, English is going to be totally fine for their title and is their preferred way of playing. And then about 15% is going to be simplified Chinese and some traditional mixed in there with the rest of APAC. And then really, looking at localization, you're looking for that last 5%, whether you want to, do German, do France, do Russian, things like that. But out of the gate, know that you really need to support English, and it's a really good idea also to look at localization for simplified traditional Chinese. And that's actually something that Viveport does help developers with now and again. Okay, Viveport Personas. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. If you want to learn more about Viveport Personas and what these players are like, please go to Bjorn Book-Larsson's talk. He's the president of Viveport. That's posted on our YouTube channel as the first in this series of talks. Really recommend going and checking that out. But really briefly here, we have 4 major personas that we've identified in the Viveport user base. These are the hardcore gamer, the demoer, the casual gamer, and the creator. Kind of the rough percentage of how they make up our base is listed here. Generally, with the hardcore gamer, you see these people coming in. They have specific genres that they like the most, usually action or shooter, and they have examples of types of games that they play, like Gun Club, Super Hot, Sorrento, etc. Demoer. This is very interesting. This is actually, a lot of people can know who this person is from, kind of the 2016 era of someone who was so excited about VR that they constantly invite friends over, bring it out, and they show off a lot of the kind of fan favorites that highlight VR. And still, this group is still very active today and likes to essentially share VR. So they play things like the Blue, Richie's Plank, Fruit Ninja, Tilt Brush. Casual gamer, I think this is the segment we're seeing kind of grow the most over time relative to the others, and has probably the most legs to continue to grow. You'll notice this is the only one that may or may not have essentially a higher spec machine. This is a little bit more mid-range machine. They play a lot of essentially what we would label as casual games. Things like different sports, here like Angry Birds VR, a very recognizable IP that has a great translation into VR, etc. And then finally, there's a very dedicated base around essentially a specific app usage, which is our creator audience. High spec machine again, and they really focus their time on one or a handful of apps. This could be Grabby Sketch, Tilt Brush, or even they're in the education space, so they're using it as an education tool. So building your title or thinking about your marketing campaign around one or more of these different personas can help you a lot, because that audience is out there to actually consume your title. So monetization. How am I going to actually monetize my title, right? What price point should I sell my title at? Probably the number one question that I get at Viveport. A lot of developers want insights into what is their best price that they could set to essentially maximize revenue. Well, so Viveport offers 4 different main business models that developers can use to monetize. First and foremost, subscription, which we launched in 2017. And it kind of remains our bread and butter. You'll see pretty quickly here why that is. But we also offer play and download. That really is just a person comes in, they pay for the title and choose to download it. LBE Arcade, this is our location-based initiative to essentially give a commercial license for your title. And then finally, in-app, so the ability to charge for incremental purchases within the app itself. So these are the 4 that we have today. And so really, how does that break down? How do we see that for developer revenues in practice? Well, subscription is really the bulk of Viveport. It makes up for 85% of total developer revenues, followed by Arcade, our LBE business, pulls in about 8% for devs. Pay and download is 7%. And then really, in-app, we don't see that much major usage. There's still some features, honestly, in there that could improve that quite a bit. I think in-app has really high potential in the long run, especially I think as more and more users move to standalone devices and things like that. And in-app, of course, being a really major way to purchase on mobile. But we're not quite there yet, especially with the bias kind of toward the PC VR space. But clearly from this numbers, Viveport today is primarily a subscription business. So how do developers, today already choose to participate in these models? We have about, a little over 2,100 titles on the store. About 40% of those are free, and then 60% are paid. So this actually looks at all the almost 2,200 titles here in this Venn diagram. About 20% of the catalog chooses to participate on all three major monetization models of pay and download, arcade, and subscription. That's honestly because they help reinforce each other. With subscription, you're allowing a clear entryway for our subscriber base, but you actually have an upgrade path to pay and download if you so choose. So if a person decides to not continue their subscription, or they just like to own their titles after they know they really like it, they can go ahead and make that purchase. And then really arcade is an entirely separate, essentially additive monetization method for reaching LBEs that a lot of developers don't have the bandwidth to do themselves. I would say that 33% that you see outside of pay and download, that 21% of just pay and download and arcade, that definitely is propped up a little bit by our free titles, since they actually cannot participate in the subscription opt-in, since it doesn't make much sense to offer a free title essentially in subscription, because you already have access to that. So how do, across top essentially revenue earners in Viveport, how do they choose to price their titles? So I looked at the top 50 by revenue. 86% of top revenue titles are in subscription. That pretty much correlates directly with the the revenue that I just shared, as far as subscription being 85% of revenue in total. But really easily you see that there's this really strong grouping kind of around $20 is the most common price. You see kind of another plateau and earmark around $10. I do think that there is some sliding as far as popular titles, especially older ones that stay popular. So we do decrease price over time. I actually think a really strong starting point, if you're looking at $20, is actually even $25 or $30. So you're giving yourself room for price discounting and lowering the price over time. It's a lot easier to go down the scale than up. But hopefully this kind of distribution curve really helps you see how the spread is. There's a couple of interesting outliers on here I'll cover real fast. The first being just there's a $60 title. This is very pointed toward a specific essentially education / business use, and clearly a high price point like that can help prop up some revenue if it can do a good job of targeting the specific venues that it's in. It can do pretty well by revenue. At the very low end, actually, you'll see there's one title in the top 50 that is $0, and that's because it's actually a subscription only title. So it only generates revenue through being a subscriber title and does not offer a set price point. But the other 49 do have a set price. So how does the higher a price point set actually influence how many subscribers essentially use your title, right? So a price point is kind of arbitrary under a subscription model, because a user is typically not paying for that. They already paid for the subscription to have access, but they still actually on our platform still see the price point if you've set one to make that full upgrade. So what I have found, looking at across our kind of top cohorts, the way that this graph is listed is essentially our top 10, top 20, top 30 in those kind of cohorts, And the price, with outside of the exception of fan favorites who, they're oldies but goodies that everybody just knows to play, they might actually have a little bit lower price point because they're older. The correlation really is that a higher price point can get a subscriber to actually choose to download and have increased usage relative to other, relative to the quality. So that's that, essentially 2 through 5 here as far as the top 20 to 50. You see that price point kind of go down. Now, this doesn't make up for, essentially the quality of the title itself, or essentially the marketing assets you provided, but the clear, if in this top 50 you're all talking really good quality things that do a good job of explaining what they are, and so you see this kind of shift in the shift down in price over, as if when I extended this graph, it doesn't continually play that way, but that's usually because you're starting going to lower quality apps, you're going into things that have just priced, they're priced way too high that no one's purchasing, regardless of subscription or pay and download, that type of thing. So think that through too, that if you're going to subscribe, it's a really good point to set a price, and maybe you want to have a little bit of a higher price than you thought you would have. All right, and channels. So channels, which are the most impactful? What really should you concentrate on? And then kind of coming from that, the importance of channels. It's how can I work with partners, and specifically, how does Viveport support developers? I wanted to make sure I shared that real quick. So as most marketing people know, there's kind of 3 major ways to kind of group channels and how to think about it. That's owned channels, earned, and paid. Owned being, of course, like your properties, your website, your social media, your email list, those types of things. Most developers I work with don't have huge followings on their own, right? And that's pretty difficult, especially if you're a brand new studio. But even I would say the most popular studios kind of have they have limited reach into the audience, right? They really want to capture a wider set. So that's really the importance of earned channels, right? So these are the relationships that you build, whether with influencers or reviews, press media, or really partnerships, which is what I want to go into a bit in the next couple slides. And then finally, paid, of course, paid ads, paid social, and most developers I'm working with don't have significant paid budgets to put behind marketing. That's totally okay. This is a scrappy time still in VR for the most part. And really, I think you can find success with owned and earned. And if you're lucky to have some budget to play around with, then some really smart spending and paid can help too. So these numbers, I'm not going to say that they're more about what I've seen. I did not crunch tons of numbers to come to it as far as the impact on conversions, but over the last 3.5 years, I can kind of tell you what I see is most impact from different developers and from the channels that we have. So really, store presence cannot be understated at how important it is. I'd say easily 70%, maybe even more, about what as far as leading to conversions for titles and actually getting someone to either make a subscription selection or pay and download. Communities, here I'm kind of thinking of Facebook groups, Reddit, Discords, things like that. Presence there is fairly important as well to drive conversions. Email, rounding about 10%. As far as driving direct, knowledge of your app. We have a fairly strong email program at Viveport to get titles in front of users, and that does fairly well. Then honestly, everything else I find falls into that 5%, whether that's your social media tweets, your essentially any other promotions you can think of. Ultimately, like they have some weight to conversions, but not a ton. However, kind of a caveat there is marketing is always more of a sum, more than some of its parts. This is the whole 1 + 1 can equal 3. And it's the idea, right, that users hit multiple touch points for your title. They'll first read about it on Reddit. Then they get an email. And finally, when they have some money in their wallet and they want to make a store purchase and they see it featured, that's when they make that buying decision. So it's not that the other things aren't important. It's just a little bit of order of operations, but store presence and kind of earned channels being such a impactful channels to think about, you need partnerships to really be able to pull that off, right, and do it. So, early on in your pre-release time frame, you want to think about all the partners you could possibly have to help you go to market. Who are partners? They can be distribution platforms like Viveport, game engines, Unreal, Unity, other technology partners that you integrate, perhaps like the multiplayer platform Photon, other developers, your peers, other people who've already successfully launched titles. They can be great partners. Event organizers, who know those people who do GDC, know those people who do Gamescom. They'll know how to work with you specifically around events. Press and media, of course, very important. Having these partners, they unlock tons of benefits. Just list a few here. Co-marketing, of course, that's a big one for Viveport. But even exchange of knowledge, best practices, like what are you doing that works? How can I leverage that? Really important, maybe if you're talking with other developers or other technology partners. Technology support, other example of where platforms can help you, or even game engines to actually get your VR title launched. Not so much a marketing benefit, but still very helpful as you get ready to release. Even financial support sometimes, right? This is obviously not very guaranteed, but there is some financial support out there that helps developers get their title from alpha to beta and beta to launch. How to approach partners? Just think about win-win scenarios. How can you essentially create shared incentives, shared goals, so you have room to collaborate, right? I can speak to distribution partners. We really want to see titles succeed when essentially titles are successful and resonate with an audience. That means we're both earning essentially more revenue off that title. So we're there to essentially support you. It's with the shared goal like that. It can lead to a lot of success. But keep in mind the different goals, because it's not the same across the different potential partners that you have. And then, what is market, oh, sorry, I hear my cat. What can Viveport do to help you with marketing? So, if you're partnering us, there's, none of these are guaranteed, unfortunately, just with the volume of titles that we have coming into the store. But we have a lot of potential ways that we support partners, and these include, that really important store feature that I just talked about as far as impact on conversions. Store promotions, we do store-wide sales and initiatives all the time. We have our own newsletter, we have our own blog, video production, social media. We go to events. This picture here is from GDC 2019. Should have been a GDC 2020 picture, but unfortunately, of course, that got canceled. And then paid media. We do paid media to support the platform, and we're only as good as the content on the platform. So we leverage a lot of titles on the store in our own paid media. We even look at titles on Viveport for hardware retail boxes. We love putting partners on kind of the latest iteration of hardware retail boxes when we can. Of course, those are opportunities as they come up, and essentially our inventory kind of clears out on the old box, or there's a new product coming, but it's still really cool. One thing to note though, depending on what business model you're thinking, is that we do, the majority of our marketing inventory goes to the subscription catalog today, just because that's the primary reason why users come to Viveport. Okay, now thinking about post-release and how you can approach marketing after your title has launched. So community, can't stress how important community is once you essentially have one. Contrary to first instinct, marketing is not talking, it's listening. I honestly like to think of it in the 80-20 rule, 80% listening, 20% talking. When you're listening, you're going to all the great channels that are out there today. There's forums, reviews, Reddit, Discord. You could have a channel in-game for leaving feedback. I even I don't know if a lot of developers do this today, but having an advisory group that worked really well for me when I worked back at Microsoft, just creating a small panel of super users to talk through with what's upcoming and get their feedback. So no shortage of ways to think about how to engage with your community. What to listen for? not all feedback is helpful, right? But a good example here of two things that are actionable is a negative comment being game mode's dead, it's not supported, no updates from the developer in the while. Well, you probably should be putting out updates and communicating with your audience. If you actually have something coming, there's ways to not share everything all at once, but to essentially let people know that there is a roadmap for future content and the game is still supported. You don't want to have radio silence. That's can be the essentially death of a title. But example, what's actionable from a marketing side with positive feedback? The new locomotion system is great. I couldn't play the title before without getting motion sickness. Chances are that user is not the only user who felt that way. Maybe this new locomotion option you added was not, didn't get marketed heavily enough, and you have, potentially need to comb through reviews and find all those users who complain about motion sickness and let them know this new feature's in there, or other ways to target, audience of users who maybe struggle with motion sickness. Just depends. But different examples of feedback to listen for. Most importantly, though, ignore outliers. There's going to be tons. There's going to be yes men who just think everything you do is amazing, and there's going to be heavy detractors who all they do is essentially insult the devs as many ways as they can think of. Find the middle ones, but it's marketing's job to essentially be the advocate internally on behalf of users. Couple examples of just where I think community support has been really strong, or in just fun examples. So Blade and Sorcery, they're on Viveport. They're one of the strongest modding communities today in VR, and their support of that modding community goes a really long way. So this is Nexus Mods, and they've broken now into the top 20 essentially modding communities across any essentially title on PC. You'll notice that they're the only VR title here in this list, the top 6 being all just Bethesda titles. But yeah, this is, it really speaks to them catering toward their community and listening to them and building a framework for extension onto that base title. This kind of also falls into the importance of UGC. Another fun example, pretty recent. So Pistol Whip, this Jessica, I believe, is an artist actually for the team, and so she created an Animal Crossing design, which is this fun way of engaging with your community. It's not new content for the game or anything like that, but it's recognizing what's kind of popular in the in timely, right? Animal Crossing being huge right now, just during the quarantine that many of us are under. And so taking advantage of that and creating a custom Pistol Whip shirt that can be shared design. I thought that was really clever. So promotions, there's a lot of standard ones. There's, of course, you want to support new content or patches and talk about those updates that are happening and do promotions around that. If your game supports great, a way to have user-generated content, really recommend pushing that. Even if your game doesn't, think about creative ways to leverage UGC. Maybe just at the baseline, having users do screenshots of their experience. You can do fun like first users to take a screenshot of this moment in game, and send it to us over social or enterprise or whatever. Lots of fun things to do there. Hosting regular community events. If you're a multiplayer title, extremely important. Really recommend setting up weekly social hours and things like that. But otherwise, still create these moments in time that aren't reliant on new content or patches, which are clearly expensive, right? Create these moments essentially artificially with marketing to spike users and have impact. Another, of course, really standard, think about sales, strategic discounting. Should you have a 10% discount at launch? It's a good question. Usually I don't find that to hurt sales, but think about the full life cycle of your title when it comes to discounting. Don't make fast decisions. The percentages matter, and the history of your discounts is something that users will essentially figure out, especially the savvy ones, to know when's the right time to buy and if they think your title will drop more in price. So be really strategic about how you go about that. But promotions, I think I want to stress that developers should think outside the box, and the ones that are most obvious aren't necessarily the ones you should take. I find this one to be awesome. So as far as a promotion, so OhShape on Viveport, they're a great rhythm fitness app. They launched a stay-home update. So with everyone mostly being stuck home, they added this great fitness mode into the experience. And on top of that, they're even making donations to UNICEF, essentially on a unique user basis. So pretty reasonable from how much money they were willing to commit. They're doing $1 per unique user who finishes that new level. That keeps it really, narrow. And obviously, if they got 20,000 new users, I think $20,000 is easily worth that acquisition cost. I wish I think anyone would hope to have that customer acquisition cost. So really a great initiative there. This is actually an example of something where we partnered. So Synth Riders, back in December, we did a giveaway with them for a leaderboard competition. And so offered a grand prize with partner again with Alienware for a desktop gaming PC when we provided both the new the HTC Vive Cosmos headset and 12 months of Viveport. And then we even gave some of the runner-ups some Viveport subscription as well. And this was a fun, engaging, giveaway to essentially create a moment in time for Synth Riders and for our holiday campaign. This is another important area where maybe you don't have budget for prizes, but maybe your partners can support you there. And then, kind of across some of these different developer examples, I showed off many different channels as well that you should think about. This is being a Reddit post. One was the Animal Crossing was a Twitter post, Nexus mod community. So yeah, think about the diversity of channels that you post to as well. And kind of rallying off just a few other, examples of creative promotions is getting people thinking outside the box. These are actually all kind of how to make use of the VR medium in marketing. So why don't you think about having a QA panel inside of a VR title? There's all these now great social apps that can support this type of thing. VR chat, Altspace. The picture to the right actually is an Altspace event that we did for Viveport pretty early on. That was, essentially a great experience. In VR referral to other titles, like can you partner with other developers to share, if there's clear overlap in audiences, or you're just a clear partner, can you highlight your title within each other's experiences in a graceful way? You have all these great 3D assets in game, but they're kind of stuck in game sometimes. So can you potentially upload your 3D assets to, a good example, I think Sketchfab, as far as creating a actual marketable asset that can go on social, can go on blogs, and it's really unique, and not a lot of people do that. Working with influencers, maybe instead of, influencers often can be a paid relationship, but perhaps you could give them a little pedigree by building a custom asset in game that celebrates that influencer. Maybe even time gate that with an influencer weekend where the influencer is co-promoting at the same time, and users can unlock that custom asset during that weekend. And then finally, I think most of the major platforms today also even do VR environments on their storefronts. So think about creating, taking a slice of your game and creating a VR environment that lives within that VR store. That can have really high impact for people who are in headset choosing to make purchases. Okay, and last little area before we get into questions and answers, if you have been waiting on putting your question in, now's a good time as we're getting closer to the Q&A section. But last but not least, on the metrics side, not enough developers keep essentially marketing scorecards against their full user journey. If you only have 5 metrics to think about, because I know bandwidth's so limited, and usually the marketing person's wearing multiple hats at studios. They could be the business developer. They could do, essentially all partnerships. Not only marketing but sales and everything else. So, and community, right? Like there's so many hats that you wear. So I know this is really hard after you kind of launched the title, but if you only have 5 things to think about these, which is store page views. This means they found your title. Wish lists, users considered your title. Purchases, they end up, converting on that title and purchasing, of course, leads directly to revenue. But then even after purchase, player concurrency, essentially how many users are in your title playing, and finally reviews, how many users out there recommend. This, if you only have these 5, this is full funnel as best as you can get, with really reviews leading back to store essentially store page views. The better your reviews, the more word of mouth marketing that you have, and kind of goes through. There's a ton of other metrics you should think about as well, and also on a per channel basis. But these 5 are really key. You should try to stay on top of these weekly if you can, and really understand what marketing actions you're doing that lead to positive and negative trends across these 5. These 5 will make or break you. And then really, what does success look like over time? What are you trying to drive with marketing? And I think really for me, the key, this is the chart that all developers should strive for. Doesn't matter what your title is. If you're able to achieve this, that means that you're having successful marketing campaigns that are doing essentially making meaningful impact. So what you're looking for is essentially rising baseline performance over time with spikes related to essentially the updates and marketing actions you're taking. So in this chart here, you see that there's these spikes, essentially punctuating what's relatively a rising flat line. That rising flat line is your day-to-day average, right, of normal usage without you doing anything. That is what should be rising over time as you have successful marketing campaigns. That means just more daily users in general, and more people that the experience is resonating with. If you're doing isolated campaigns where it just drops back to the same thing every single time, I really would not consider that a successful campaign. You're not getting the long-term benefit that you're hoping for. You just created essentially an artificial spike. You got a couple, activities that you saw, but it went right back down to where it was. You really need that growth over time to essentially see the success that you're hoping to have. All right, and that essentially concludes most of the session. Again, we went through kind of the importance of knowing who your audience is out there and what's addressable at a high level before you even get started, knowing what languages they speak and kind of the cultural considerations. Monetization, what business model should I think about? Clearly, subscription being really important for Viveport. Channels, what has the highest impact, and how should I think about working out with partners? And then finally, we looked at post-release, how to engage with your community, different types of promotions, and getting creative there. And then finally, the important metrics you should be measuring over time to improve your marketing. Okay, so last slide of the talk here, just for more information as I wait for some questions to come in, is get started essentially with Viveport at developer.viveport.com. This is where you can get into our developer console, submit your app, and eventually launch on the Viveport store. It has also a bunch of links out to helpful resources, our SDKs and things like that. If you're looking to get started with Vive hardware or any of our great SDKs on that side, like hand tracking, etc., developer.vive is where you'd like to go. And then finally, if you're curious about the rest of the talks in this webinar series, you can find them on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/HTCVive. The full playlist is there, and we're going to keep adding them. This talk should be made available on YouTube. Pretty much should be available by the next day, tomorrow. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Q&A. Thank you so much. All right, it looks like I already have my first question. So can you describe the amount of hours of monthly usage of the various personas? Which persona spends the most time monthly in headset? Good question. So I would say you'll find, so across the board, we're still seeing, I think Viveport have the average user across everyone ends up being they spend about 5 to 6 hours in total per month in headset. Clearly that's we have I think as an industry we have area to grow. That's also an IDC report, so something that I'm pretty sure that's right. IDC might be wrong there, sorry. I think, but our super data. And so they've looked across all the different platforms and they estimate about 6 hours in VR headset usage total for owners. But if you own a console, like a standard game console, you're looking at spending 45 hours per month. Then if you're essentially a consumer of streaming content or TV for essentially video, your media consumption there could be upwards of like I think 125 hours per month as a household. So really crazy numbers that VR is up against, and we need to see that essentially grow over time, the total usage in VR. Across personas, I think at the highest level, our creator audience can actually really engaged and spend a lot of time in VR. If you actually reference and go to the previous webinar, Bjorn Books, he actually talks about titles that had some of the longest engaging sessions. And I believe that fell in the kind of the creator area where they're, I'm actually sculpting something, right? That's an artistic pursuit and can spend a really long time in VR with like titles like Gravity Sketch, for example. Okay, and looking for my next question here. Sorry, 1 second. Here we go. I'm just adjusting my pane so I can see all my questions. Does Viveport offer marketing services on the App Store? Oh, this keeps moving on me. Sorry. Does Viveport marketing services offer marketing services on the App Store, such as storefront placement, for example? Of course. Yep. So as kind of mentioned in the talk, where we do offer storefront placement, really important in conversions, probably the most important thing that we can do. Question around how do you think developers in the top 50 plan titles pricing? Is it based on the popularity of different price points, or is it based on development time? I think I do think you have to, right in the beginning, think about, what is your break-even point and set expectations, for the cost that you've put into the project. That will at least help define like where your kind of minimums and maximums are. You shouldn't do anything that's going to, of course, make you lose revenue unless you have other goals besides that. So I think once you've established your break even, that's when you understand your price point. And I think that, besides the popularity of, the $20 that we saw, you have to really consider the quality of experience and length of play. Does it offer hours upon hours, or is it a short 15 minutes but high quality? Like, you have to balance that yourself. Look at similar projects in that genre, and that'll really give you a clear direction to what your competitors are doing in the space. Okay, looking at the next question here. Can you describe the amount of hours of monthly usage of the various persona? Oh, sorry, that's the one I already did. Huh. Are there any numbers or trends related to the success rates of titles that are published by dedicated publishers versus titles that are self-published by the developers? Really good question. I have not looked at that, the difference between self-published or with a publisher. I would say that I don't think not working with a publisher in today's market with VR hurts you. And it really depends on the skill set that you have in studio. I think a publisher can come in, and if marketing's not your strong suit, then they can really raise you up and do essentially meaningful impact. However, I think for developers who've been doing this for a while, they've been making 2D games, they have experience, maybe they worked in AAA before. I find that they have just as much strength as a self-publisher and can find success. So I don't necessarily think that a publisher correlates directly to success or not. What is your overview of the Middle East market? It's a great question. It's still, from a Viveport perspective, still very small today. I would argue, I would imagine that's the same for other platforms. Tons of potential, though. I think there we do have HTC staff and actually Viveport team members who specifically look at that region. I think there's a combination of really needing more support from developers on the localization front to help build that market. It's a chicken and egg problem. Market can't really grow without the content there, and the content's not likely to localize when there's not a market. And you have people like me basically saying that English and simplified Chinese will get you most of the way. But yes, that market has a lot of potential, no doubt there. I just think that it's still relatively small, and pretty much as an industry, we need to help kind of nurture that. How soon prior to the release should you launch a coming soon page for a best chance of success? That's a great question. So for me, I prefer tighter marketing campaigns. I think that I think some people see campaign or PC, or sorry, console or PC marketing cycles, which can go far back as like 18 to 24 months. I think those are really only successful with like storied franchises that can really engage an audience that long, and they know that this thing's like guaranteed and coming. I think that shorter windows of time are much stronger for marketing campaigns in VR, because you only have so much bandwidth too, and you really should focus kind of in that window. So I think a healthy amount is usually 3 to 6 months for starting your kind of marketing campaign, at least in earnest. And then for a coming soon page, I don't think once you're starting your marketing in that kind of level, I would say as soon as you have messaging that you're happy with, as soon as you have assets you're happy with, particularly a trailer that reflects in-game, something that you're proud of showing in-game, so it's not something that's going to lead to bad impressions of your title. I would put that page up. That will help drive wish lists, help you get store presence, and give you a destination to drive marketing to. If you're doing marketing but you have nowhere to send people except maybe to your website or to sign up for email, that's not nearly as powerful as getting people to sign up through a coming soon page to wish list your title, particularly if you're going for conversions. If I were to do paid advertisements, which channel would you provide the most bang for your buck? YouTube creators, Reddit promotions, review sites, Viveport. So Viveport, we don't do any paid media. You wouldn't be able to spend money toward us to essentially sponsor our features or anything like that. Of course, you can drive your own marketing that points to Viveport, which is awesome, and we love to see that. However, so YouTube creators, specifically around influencers, yeah, a lot of them are going to seek paid relationships. I think that's tricky. I think you really need to find influencers that your title resonates with, that they genuinely like it, and they're not they're ingenuine. If they're ingenuine, it comes out in the content they create, and it just won't generate. It doesn't resonate with that audience because that audience isn't there for that type of content. So I think some influencer budget can go, but you have to be really careful and selective of who you pick. Reddit promotions. I've seen some paid things on Reddit. I can't really speak to. I don't find them to be super impactful on the paid side. I think organic Reddit can be really, really important. That is catering to each different subreddit and understanding how that audience engages with particular content that's posted there. Some Reddits are supportive of developer promotion. Others are absolutely not, and will essentially ban developers who they think are self-promoting. Think about where you can fit within the rules of the subreddit and engage with that community meaningfully. I think also a good rule of thumb is every post you make, you should look to make 5 posts on other content on that Reddit. So it shows that you're engaged, and you're actually, you can have a little flair that says you're the developer or something title, but you're commenting on, hey, this other game looks cool, or this person's rigged up headset looks cool, whatever it is, whatever that is. But engaging organically on that Reddit will help you when you make your own posts as well. Can you recall any examples of marketing campaigns for older titles released over a year ago that have found success in reigniting consumer interest? That's interesting. That's a really good question. So for titles that are older, I think there's, I want to give you like a hard example like you asked for. But while I'm thinking about that, I'll talk about what's important. So when you're thinking about marketing something that old, definitely a new coat of paint goes a long way. So if you're able to update your marketing assets specifically on the store, potentially like if you made updates throughout that year, and then you like show like a more integrated approach, so showing all those updates together in this like newer and polished game, I think that can do wonders. I really love like the concept of Game of the Year editions, which basically bundle up all the improvements over the last year and almost do like a relaunch. I think that's a really strong way of essentially reigniting an older title. I do think timing that as well with newer update or content can help a lot as far as give meaning to that campaign. However, a lot of times there's not necessarily developer resources, and you have to try to create a marketing campaign, and you haven't made a ton of updates, or you don't have the bandwidth to. Strictly from a marketing sense, I think that finding ways to look at what is driving traffic and kind of almost leaning into that will help a lot. So if you see a lot of success, if right now, like, I think a good example for my PowerPoint, honestly, is like, if everybody right now, the rage is Animal Crossing, if there's a way to lean into that and relate your your game into the just what other what's the trend, new and trending right now, that can really help people see that you're still active with that title, and kind of look past the fact that it launched over a year ago. I think if you stay up on the new and trending kind of topicals, and you participate in the communities on social and things like that, it really shows that your title's still relevant because the developer is still actively communicating, and that goes a long way. All right, let's go next question. Great presentation. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. You mentioned healthy marketing budget. What is a healthy marketing budget? Really depends on your studio and what your expectations are. Honestly, for a lot of the indie developers that I work with, that I think if they had $5,000 tucked away, I think they could spread that out actually, and use it really meaningfully. A couple choice boosted posts across socials, ones that they already saw organic traffic resonate with, and they were kind of tested before. Boosting those can be really effective across different social. I think clearly if you're you're in a multi-million-dollar project, you're gonna want a better marketing budget, and that's kind of timed at the beginning when you have a project that size. You might be talking a couple $100,000 or something, but I think the most people who are on this webinar, and for the vast majority that I see, you're going to be talking marketing budgets in the thousands, not hundreds of thousands. And just because you have it doesn't mean you should spend it recklessly. I do think also pre-release, if you're able to get event booth space and things like that, that can really go a long way, because you're able to set up with media and journalists who are coming and going to those shows. So hopefully when the world opens back up, events will be in the full swing of it, because I think you can get a lot of money for that as well. And there's usually great indie places in each event too that kind of offset the cost, so you're not spending too much money to get a booth up and running. I think another really good area to spend budget. Do single player games have a disadvantage in VR, or do they perform just as well as multiplayer games? Good question. So I think on the subscription side, I think there is an inherent benefit to multiplayer games, just from the fact that they new content is essentially created by the other players. So you're getting repeated usage over month to month, which allows you to monetize that the same subscribers. How and single players don't have that advantage, because the only way they can bring in essentially no more active playing is by either creating artificial incentives in game, right? So there's just really long tasks that take multiple months to achieve, or you drip feed content, so you have something that's every month that comes out into the game as an update. And so I think multiplayer games do see benefits there, like in a subscription platform. But single player games can get really smart about also how they can leverage repeated usage. I actually think that it's really risky today to create a multiplayer title. I see a lot more multiplayer titles fail than single player games, and that's mainly that there's we're still waiting for enough usage in headset, right, to outside of essentially fan favorites, to make sure those lobbies are continually populated and there's enough players. I mean, even certain games in PC and console space struggle, right, to keep multiplayer lobbies up, in VR doubly so. For every successful multiplayer game, I think those do really well, but I think I actually see more failures in the multiplayer space. Another question: do you have any tips for solo designer or developers on how to continue development for an upcoming updates, but at the same time maintaining buzz for upcoming updates? Yes. This is incredibly hard, I think, to keep up on marketing and still try to actually make your title. I think it's great that, just by asking the question, you understand, the strong importance of doing the marketing. I think that's almost one thing where I see developers struggle is that they basically, of course, I think they bias toward the creation, and that's why they got into it to begin with. But then the marketing kind of goes by the wayside. I think strong I think leveraging industry tools will help a ton when it comes to just essentially keeping that up. Use things like Hootsuite or project management tasks to like Hootsuite in particular allows you to post to many different social channels at once, so you can do like Facebook and Twitter and all those with a single post. But it also helps you do scheduling and all those things ahead of time. So maybe you can like take a Saturday and schedule everything out for the next week, so you're not constantly interrupting yourself. I think that helps a lot. Otherwise, I think as a solo dev, really try to leverage partners when possible. So how can you really piggyback off of some of the marketing channels other people have? And basically, what that costs you is an email, right? Of reaching out and talking to that partner and just seeing what's able to do for them. And perhaps the goal being, right, is that they're benefiting from you, but get them to work a little bit on your behalf, and that can save you a lot of bandwidth and give you high impact. Which platforms for advertising are you suggesting over the Europe? Which platforms are for advertising? Oh, that's a really good question. I mean, we generally stick with the traditional social for the most part on the Viveport side. We look at social, or sorry, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Those are probably the main three that we put paid into. And then we also have I think with specific to Europe, I know we do look. We have team members on the ground there who work specifically with media relations and partnerships that are like centric to their specific territory or region. That helps a lot when you want deeper kind of deeper inroads into like the French or German community and things. Then I think a PR route is really strong to go. That's probably where I'd invest time, or even events again, like if there's Gamescom, like that's great for the whole of Europe, but especially for Germany. I think paid, if you don't really know where to spend with paid media, like then if you're thinking like really specific, I think it's better to look at those other areas. Looks like 2 more questions, and I do want to wrap this up. I know we're quickly approaching our time here. What suggestions do you have to keep your game in a player's Viveport subscription list to extend revenue from that player? Really good question. So you need to keep people coming back. I think one is just what is the actual gameplay loop in game. I think everyone should mostly be making games, particularly around subscription, that do have a replay loop that makes sense to come back to. Not to say that we have a lot of great like narrative short experiences that are high quality, like something like Gloomy Eyes that do well in subscription, but they're kind of one time and done. But they are, they essentially what they did, and I actually think it's a great example, is we released Gloomy Eyes in episodes. So we did episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and essentially it was October, November. Actually, I think it was October, December, and then January. So we actually we kind of spread out the release to keep people kind of going back for the new episodes. So that was a good way of engaging with the kind of subscriber base. And after the 3rd episode came out, they actually bundled it up, made it also a pay and download title instead of just subscriber only. And then essentially, someone who wants to go and just buy all 3 episodes could do that as well, in addition to access it on subscription. So that's one way to think about it. That's a great example of a title that by no means has a a natural inclination toward subscription. Other things to do, think about ways to, I think actually it really makes sense to create a monthly like drip feed content pipeline. So think of a small feature that you're able, you're able to essentially elongate the game. So maybe it's, there's, oh man, okay, like okay, I'm playing some Animal Crossing right now, so a thing in that game, right, is that they're also doing all these like holiday events and things. But let's say you have really limited bandwidth, but you want to get people logging in every month. Well, they do they have in-game like furniture sets. So maybe you have like a 12-piece furniture set, but you can only unlock that one furniture set like each month. So you have like once you log in May, you get granted that, and then you have to log in June to get the next one. And that's only costing you maybe 12 3D assets. Maybe that's something to do, and that's not doesn't change the other things you should be doing, but just another incentive to keep people coming back. That can help a lot, especially for like power users, which we hope that our subscriber base is, as they're generally actually much more engaged compared to others. And then let's look at my last question is, are there plans to create per game communication channels between developers and the community via Viveport? Really, really good question. We don't have forums by default right now. We do have like a community forum for Viveport itself. We're looking at that. Stay tuned essentially for new features coming out of Viveport. We do want to allow people to engage more directly with the audience that they have on Viveport, maybe things like forums, but we actually think that there's really creative things that we can do as a platform that no one else is doing because of the subscriber base. A lot of people have access to the same amount of content, so I think there's really great ways we can build community events and things like that. So that was my last question. Really, really great questions. Thank you so much, everyone who participated in that. Thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar series. Again, if you are wanting to access more of these talks, go to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/HTCVive. You can this talk will be up there by tomorrow, and see the rest of our webinar series. Next week we have what's coming soon to the developer console. So Adhar from our team is going to present all the great things that we're adding to the developer console, and some of the good work we're doing there. So please join us next Tuesday for that. And I'll catch you on the next one. Really looking hearing from you. Thank you so much.